The WTO riots were a series of protests spanning from November 29th to December 2nd. The WTO is the World Trade Organization, and they promote trade between countries. Protesters were against the free trade that the WTO promoted. Here's a look behind what happened during these protests and one man's story of how he was involved.
In 1993, Seattle hosted an event for APEC, which is the Asia Pacific Economic Conference. Yes. And I had just finished graduate school and went down and volunteered my time at APEC. And so as a result of some connections that I made and friends that I made in the APEC conference, I was able to do some volunteer work when the WTO came to Seattle in 1999. While I was a volunteer and where I worked was pretty uninteresting. I was helping to create signs for the event. So I actually spent a lot of time at Kinko's down by the convention center making signage.
So did you ever have to go down to the convention center while the riots were in full swing?
I was supposed to go down, yes, I was supposed to go down to the convention center to help out. And it was just one of those kind of, it's like, just like at APEC, you have no official duties and you're not part of the convention or the conference per se, but just kind of hanging around the periphery of these events is always kind of interesting. So that day I was intending to go down to the convention center for exactly that purpose, just kind of to be there.
November 29th, day one of protests. All day the protests stayed very docile, few arrests with smaller crowds than in the days to come.
The theater was surrounded by buses, and all the intersections near the convention center were occupied by protesters. This stopped the participants from reaching the convention center.
The convention center was the heart of the negotiations, right? So WTO is the World Trade Organization, and the ministers were there ostensibly to have multilateral and bilateral conversations between different countries. So that was occurring at the convention center. Then the ministers and delegates were staying at various hotels in the downtown corridor. So the confrontation really between the police and the protesters was occurring in a tight circle around that area. And so I was coming from the east side, so I was kind of at the back edge of that, and of course with just sort of being naturally curious and about it, I was interested, so I didn't turn around. I was wanted to see what was going on.
November 30th, day two of protesting. The day started out fairly peacefully. Police made a ring of buses around the Paramount Theater, the place of the opening ceremony. Protesters ensured that delegates didn't reach the ceremony on time. Later that afternoon, the Labor March drew a crowd and was the most feared event of the entire protests due to its ability to shut down the city. Things turned sour when anarchists showed up during the Labor March and gave protesters a bad name. By the end of the day, the National Guard had been called in and a curfew had been set on the city. The day ended with a fight for Capitol Hill between police and residents. The Labor March was one of the biggest protests in Seattle's history. Everyone feared this event because of its ability to shut down the city. Busloads of protesters showed up. Everyone from students to agricultural workers to steel unions, pilots, construction workers, and environmentalists. Everyone was packed into Memorial Stadium to try and shut down the WTO.
Yeah, tough situation. I think the police were caught undermanned and were not prepared to handle the number of people that came and started to protest, right? I mean, they really underestimated the size of the protest. They underestimated the motivation of the protesters. They took a very Seattle, everything is going to be nice approach, and I think it was the first time that Seattle was really introduced to the idea of there are troublemakers out there who want nothing, that all they want to do is create trouble. So, I don't know that, I don't think, looking back is always easy, and in retrospect, it's always easy to say, oh, I should have done this or that. I think the police responded as best they could, given their sort of understanding of the situation at the time, right? It was the anarchists who kind of spurred on the violence, right? And it's the idiots dressed in black and wearing hoodies, and who really didn't have a political base or a political point of view. They just wanted to create trouble, and the same individuals still try and create trouble every May Day, right? So I think that the expectation at the time was that it would be crowds of people that were simply exercising their First Amendment rights to say what they wanted and to gather and protest, right? And there was a lot of angst at that point, right? By the end of the 90s, the effects of liberalized trade policies were really being felt. I mean, people were losing jobs, factories were closing, all of these things were happening. So, I guess that's what kind of led to the violence.
They just broke the Starbucks window. They're breaking into it right now. I'm moving across the street.
December 1st, day 3 of protests. President Clinton arrived in Boeing Field that morning to address the delegates of the WTO. Also that morning, police pulled out of Westlake Center and ended their arrests, leaving the no protest zone unguarded. Despite the fact that there was little violence here, tear gas continued to be fired around the city where needed. Fighting continued into the night. December 2nd, final day of protesting. Peaceful protests happened all day. Police gave escorts to marchers, and Mayor calmed citizens' fears, urging them that it was safe to go back into the city and do their Christmas shopping. The last tear gas was fired at 2:25 p.m. The WTO conference ended early the next day, December 3rd, due to disruption by the protesters.
We benefit, right? I mean, when you go to Walmart to buy a $3 t-shirt, it's $3 because it's being manufactured in Vietnam, where the cost of labor is significantly less than here in the United States. The downside, however, is that the textile industry in the South is pretty much destroyed because of liberalized trade. So it's a thorny issue.
We're not against world trade, the rules of world trade. We're against world trade without rules, and that's what we have right now.
Looking at the rioting aspect of the WTO riots, if you'd been in charge of the Seattle police, what would you have done differently to handle the protesters?
More tear gas.
The same.
I am not struggling at all! I am not struggling! I am peaceful! Remove your knee from my neck!
Ending all of the shenanigans.